Johnny Mathis hid in silence for decades about the people who were out to get him. They called the music legend too soft. He still sold 360 million songs, but now that he's 89, he's done lying. The hateful threats that made him run for cover on stage, the mean name Frank Sinatra gave him, and the drug use that almost ended everything. Today, we're going to show who really tried to shut down the noise. Jack Mathis was born in Gilmer, Texas, on September 30th, 1935. He was the fourth of 7 children in a family that loved music very much. Played the piano and sang on stage as a theater musician for a while. Johnny was affected by this song background for a long time. Johnny's dad saved $25 to buy an upright piano when he was 8 years old. This was a big purchase at the time. Their San Francisco apartment had a small front door, so the piano was too big to fit through. So Clem took it apart and put it back together inside the next morning. He really believed in his son's abilities because he worked so hard. Johnny was born not long after his family moved to San Francisco and lived in the Fillmore neighborhood. Often called the Harlem of the West, the area was full of music and art. The place where he grew up shaped his love of singing. When he was 8, he was already singing at church, school, and family events. He learned how to sing My Blue Heaven from his dad, who was his first master. They had so much faith in him that when he was young, they even started a small fan club for him. Johnny started taking voice classes with Connie Cox, a well-known voice teacher in the Bay Area, when he was 13. The family couldn't pay for regular lessons, so Johnny did chores around the house in exchange for classes. He learned everything from vocal scales to classical techniques over the course of 6 years. These skills helped shape his smooth tenor voice. He learned how to become one of the most famous singers in America through those years of training. Even though Johnny loved music, he was also a great athlete. He did really well in basketball and track and field at George Washington High School. He set the school record for the high jump at San Francisco State University, which was 6 feet 5.5 inches. At the time, that was only 2 inches short of the Olympic mark. A lot of people in the Bay Area knew him as one of the best all-around players. Johnny began performing in neighborhood nightclubs while he was in college. Something that changed my life happened one Sunday at the Black Hawk during a jam session. Sheila Noga, the co-owner of the club, heard him sing and was drawn to his singing right away. She saw how good he could be and hired him as a boss. In 1955, she set up for George Avakian, an executive at Columbia Records, to see Johnny play at Andy's 440 Club. That's why Avakian sent a telegram to Columbia. "I found a phenomenal 19-year-old boy who could go all the way. Please send blank contracts." Later that year, Johnny, who was only 19, got his first record deal with Columbia Records. Johnny Mathis, his first record, gave popular music a new sound. It came out in 1956. Gil Evans and Teo Macaro's jazz-inspired arrangements on the record brought out Mathis' smooth vocal style. However, jazz records were not doing well at that time, and the record had a hard time selling. It had songs like Easy to Love and Prelude to a Kiss, but it never made it to the top 15 of Billboard's list of the best-selling pop albums. Columbia knew they needed to try something different when the record didn't do well. That moment changed everything. Mitch Miller, a very important person at Columbia Records, helped Mathis turn away from jazz and towards romantic pop ballads. Even though his first record wasn't a big hit, it showed that he was unique. It was easy to understand and warm, and his voice had a depth of feeling that made him stand out. Late in 1956, Miller took over all of Mathis's work and changed his name to a balladeer. Mathis cut 2 songs that would change his future at a recording session that autumn. Great, and I don't have anything to say about it. Wonderful made it to number 14 on the Billboard charts when it came out in early 1957. And it's not for me to say made it even higher to number 5. Both songs showed off Mathis's smooth tenor voice and rich orchestral arrangements, which made him stand out at a time when rock and roll was popular. After that came Chances Are. This dreamy ballad was Mathis's first number 1 hit when it came out in the middle of 1957, and it is still one of his most favorite songs. It was written by Robert Allen and Al Stillman and showed how he could use subtle changes in his voice to show deep feeling. Miller's plan had worked because he had 3 top 10 songs by the end of 1957. Even though rock stars like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry were more popular at the time, his romantic songs became his signature sound and won over fans of all ages. On June 16, 1957, Mathis made a big splash when he appeared on The Ed Sullivan Show. He sang in front of millions of people when he was only 21 years old, making him famous all over the country quickly. At the time, the show was one of the biggest stages for any performer, and being on it meant instant fame. Mathis sang some of his newer hits, such as Wonderful and It's Not For Me To Say. His songs went through the roof on the charts after the publicity. Soon after, Chances Are became a huge hit, becoming a big star in American pop music by hitting #1. Mathis's smooth voice and polished stage presence were praised by critics. His understated elegance linked with people who wanted something more romantic and timeless than the high-energy performances of rock stars. His smooth voice and big band arrangements made his music sound like it was from a movie. Soon, that link to films became real when MGM Studios asked him to sing It's Not For Me To Say for the 1957 movie Lizzie. Later, he sang A Certain Smile for the soundtrack of another movie, which showed that he was famous in more than just the music business. Johnny Mathis's Best Hits, released in 1958, changed the course of music history. It wasn't just a bunch of songs. It was the first album ever advertised as a gathering of the best songs. At that time, record companies didn't put out CDs in this way, but Mitch Miller at Columbia Records had a big idea. Mathis was on tour and couldn't make any new music, so Miller put together a collection of his best songs, such as Chances Are, Wonderful, and It's Not For Me To Say. The record that came out of it was groundbreaking and stayed on the Billboard best-selling pop LPs chart for 490 weeks. Almost 10 years. That record stood until Pink Floyd's The Dark Side of the Moon beat it in 1983. The album's popularity not only made history, it started a new trend. Soon, other acts did the same, like Elvis Presley with his Golden Records, and then the Eagles with their greatest hits from 1971 to 1975. It became common for artists to put together albums of their best hits, which shows how important Mathis' collection was. By 1999, it had sold more than 1 million copies, which shows how popular he is still today. Later that same year, Mathis put out the album Merry Christmas, which became a holiday favorite. The warm, smooth sound of his voice and the full orchestral arrangements by Percy Faith made it one of the most beloved Christmas records ever. Holiday songs like Silent Night, White Christmas, and Winter Wonderland became well known. When it first came out, the record did very well on the charts, and it stayed on the charts every holiday season for years. It became a multi-platinum record in 2013 after selling more than 5 million copies. He was the voice of Christmas, not just a singer of holiday songs. His versions of Sleigh Ride and Silver Bells are still played on the radio every December, so his memory lives on. He has had many big hits, but It's Not For Me To Say was one of his first big hits. The song was in the 1957 movie Lizzie. It made it to #5 on the Billboard Top 100 and became a favorite among lovers. After many years, films like Goodfellas and Zodiac brought Mathis songs to the attention of younger people. Then came Misty, the song that made his career what it is today. Errol Garner first recorded it as an instrumental piece for jazz piano. When Johnny Mathis added his voice to it in 1959, it became something more. The song got to #12 on the US Pop Singles chart with words by Johnny Burke and a moving performance. It did better than just be a hit. It became well known. Garner himself went to the recording session, which was his personal stamp of approval for Mathis' version. The unique fade-in effect in which Mathis walked towards the microphone while singing gave the song emotional depth that made it stand out. Misty is now officially one of the best songs of all time, thanks to both Mathis and Garner's induction into the Grammy Hall of Fame. There were a lot of racial hurdles when Johnny Mathis was making his career. This was especially true in the music business. In the 1950s, as a black singer, he had to deal with a lot more than just poor treatment. It was dangerous for him. Someone told him before a show in the South that they were going to shoot him if he went on stage, which was a very scary moment. Mathis didn't back down. He kept the show going. He moved around a lot on stage while singing his hit song Chances Are, which made him harder to hit. It was a scary truth that black artists had to face. Even those who were as good as he is. Mathis had to deal with segregation in almost every part of touring, in addition to the direct dangers. He wasn't always allowed to stay in the same hotels as his white bandmates or people in the crowd. This happened a lot in the South and places like Las Vegas that were known for having strict race boundaries. Even though he had played at big places, he had to stay on the west side of Las Vegas. That area is only for black artists and residents. People of color who worked as musicians were treated badly no matter how much money they brought to the casinos. Mathis once said that these things were like watching a sad movie. He saw the wrongdoing, but he couldn't fix it right away. On the other hand, his success and that of other black artists like Sammy Davis Jr. moved things along. By 1960, they were so common and made so much money that hotel owners had to change their rules. There wasn't just one big protest that led to desegregation on the Las Vegas Strip. A slow change happened because of people like Mathis who just showed up, did their thing, and wouldn't be pushed away. Mathis's experiences with racism changed how he thought about equality, but it didn't make him who he was. Growing up in San Francisco, he was exposed to a wider range of people. He didn't fully understand racism until he started performing. Instead of getting angry, he did what his parents told him to do: keep his mind on his goals and not think about what was wrong. He decided to fight back in his own way by keeping performing and not letting threats stop him, and by showing that ability couldn't be limited by being put in separate groups. Helen and John Noga, Johnny Mathis's longtime managers, and he broke up with them in 1964 for more than just business reasons. His job changed, and he had to take charge of his own future after that messy and emotional turning point. The Nogas found Mathis and helped him build his business from the ground up. At one point, they were like family to him, but by the early 1960s, there were cracks in it. Helen Noga was the one who made Mathis famous. She got him his first big record deal with Columbia Records and helped him get hits like Chances Are and Misty. She even sold her jazz club, the Black Hawk, so she and her husband could focus on managing him full-time. Mathis even lived with the Nogas for a while, making it clear how closely their personal and work lives were linked. But there were problems along the way to success. Mathis knew that his money wasn't growing the way it should have, even though he was one of the best-paid entertainers of the time. It was said that his net worth went up by less than $25,000 between January 1961 and June 1964. This was very scary. Mathis thought there was bad management, too many fees, and spending money that wasn't needed. In October 1964, he took the Nogas to court to try to get out of his deal, which made things very bad. Helen Noga did not give up. She sued back, saying that Mathis's success was due to her work. The court case got public and nasty. What was once a strong relationship was hurt forever. It wasn't just about money that they broke up. Mathis wanted power. His 29th birthday was September 30th, 1964. On that day, he did something brave by starting Rogan Productions, a company that would handle his shows, TV appearances, and promotional work. After 3 years, he started John Matt Records to make his own songs. In the 1960s, when record companies and managers had most of the power, this was a very rare thing for an artist to do. But Mathis was set on making something that was truly his. Mathis found security when Ray Hahn took over as manager. Hahn stayed by his side until he died in 1984. After that, Mathis took over all of Hahn's business activities. But the breakup with the Nogas was hard. He was physically and emotionally worn out from the stress of the case and his never-ending tour schedule. He had a hard time getting off sleeping pills, but he did it in the end. Even though rock and roll bands like the Beatles were ruling the charts at the time, Mathis showed how versatile he was. He didn't fade into the background. Instead, he changed. Albums like Olé, 1965, which had songs in both Spanish and Portuguese, showed that he could adapt to changes in the music business. Many people know Johnny Mathis for his smooth singing and classic hits, but behind the scenes, he had personal problems that almost shut down his career. In the early 1960s, he met Dr. Max Jacobson, a doctor known for giving famous people so-called vitamin shots, and that's when his problems with addiction began. There were amphetamines mixed in with these shots. At first, they looked like a trick. Mathis had been having trouble with laryngitis, but all of a sudden, he could speak again. He could play shows all night long, sometimes 5 shows in one night at places like New York's Copacabana. But the extra energy cost something. He became sick from the drugs, and before he knew it, he was hooked. Another trouble was drinking too much. He really liked champagne more than any other drink. At first, it seemed like a fun way to celebrate success. But as time went on, it became clear that his drinking and prescription drugs were taking over his life. In the 1980s, he understood that these habits weren't just fun. They were putting everything he had built at risk. He understood that he needed to alter his behavior. With the help of a friend who was First Lady Nancy Reagan, things began to change. She didn't think twice about speaking up when she saw him drinking at a gathering. She thought he might have a problem and made plans for him to go to the Havre de Grace Rehabilitation Center in Maryland. The center, which was run by Jesuit brothers, did more than just detoxing. They helped Mathis figure out why he was using drugs and drinking in the first place. "It was an event that changed my life." He would say it was the best thing that ever happened to him later. Reagan's help wasn't just a favor for himself. Through her Just Say No campaign, she was very active in the fight against drugs, and her help showed how important human connections can be in the fight against addiction. To get better, though, it took more than just skilled help. He got through it with the help of his faith and his family. His parents taught him to be strong as he grew up in San Francisco. Now those lessons have been very useful because they loved and understood him instead of judging him. His family was there for him when he needed them the most. Mathis never gave up his love of music, no matter what. He kept recording and acting even when things were very bad for him. He wrote some of the most famous songs of his time. He's one of the best-selling acts of all time thanks to hits like Chances and Misty. He went back to the stage with a new sense of focus and purpose after getting sober. In 1982, Johnny Mathis made a casual comment that changed everything. He had never meant to be famous for anything other than his singing. He told Us Weekly in what he thought was an off-the-record talk, "Homosexuality is a way of life that I've grown accustomed to." It was a simple statement, but it was a dangerous one at the time. People who were LGBTQ+ did not feel welcome in public in the early 1980s, especially in the United States. It was the height of social conservatism, and being gay was still seen as wrong in a lot of places. When Mathis' comment got out, there was a quick and harsh response. Some fans from more conservative parts of the country were so angry that they sent death threats. Because of how hostile people were, Mathis quickly stopped talking about his personal life. Not because he was ashamed, but because he wanted to stay safe, he stopped talking about it altogether. Mathis refused to let the trouble stop him from advancing in his work. He worked on making music, which was what he had always done best. He kept recording and playing with the same smooth, romantic sound that made him famous. Other artists might have used their fame to protest or fight back, but Mathis went in a different direction. He didn't try to hide his skill. He thought that his art, not his personal life, should describe him. He didn't talk about being gay in public for many years. After that, things were different in 2017. The world was now more open-minded, and Mathis finally felt safe enough to talk freely again. In a talk with CBS News, he said the same things he had said years before. It was a different response. Instead of reaction, people stood by each other. Now that times had changed, Mathis could finally tell the truth without worrying about losing everything. His friends never really gave up on him, even through everything. A lot of people stood by his side, even during the hardest years, because they liked his voice, how nice he was, and how quiet he was. Without meaning to, Mathis became a symbol of strength, a guy who had lived through a time of intolerance and come out on top. A performance that took the music world by storm in the late 1970s was a big part of Johnny Mathis's comeback. Too Much, Too Little, Too Late was a huge hit when it was sung with Denise Williams in 1978. It was his first #1 song in the US since Chances Are in 1957. It went to #1 on the Billboard Hot 100, the Adult Contemporary, and the R&B charts. There's been more than 20 years between them. The song was also popular in other countries. It went to #3 in the UK and #9 in Canada. It wasn't just well-liked. It was also very successful in the business world, winning gold in the US and silver in the UK. Because of this success, they worked together with Williams more. Later that year, they put out an album of duets called That's What Friends Are For. It went gold in both the US and UK and reached #19 on the Billboard album lists. Mathis used this to make duets with Dionne Warwick, Natalie Cole, and Gladys Knight, among others. Even though dance and rock were popular at the time, he stayed relevant by mixing modern sounds with his signature romantic style. Adapting helped him live a long time. In the 1950s, he started out as a smooth ballad singer. But as time went on, he added jazz, soul, dance, soft rock, and even country to his music. His 1979 album Mathis Magic had disco sounds, and his 2010 record, Let It Be Me, Mathis in Nashville, Tennessee, showed how he felt about country music. Even after decades in show business, he was still finding new ways to connect with people. Johnny Mathis sings the Great New American Songbook in 2017. It includes covers of current hits by artists like Adele and Pharrell Williams. This shows that his voice could warm up any era of music. Mathis was still useful even as the music business moved towards digital channels. He kept putting out new music, re-releasing old favorites, and praising his huge back catalog. The Voice of Romance, the Columbia Original Album Collection, a huge 68-disc box set that came out in 2017, introduced his music to a new audience. Culture and pop. The X-Files was one of the best places to hear his songs. In the 1996 episode Home, the strange contrast between his soothing voice and the disturbing material of the episode stuck with me. However, Mathis didn't like how violent the scene was and wouldn't let his original recording be used. This led to the alternative. His music was also used in Mad Men, which made him an even more timeless hero. People have liked Johnny Mathis for almost 70 years, and it's easy to see why. With over 360 million records sold around the world, his warm tenor voice, easy-to-understand phrasing, and ability to connect emotionally with listeners have made him one of the most popular acts of all time. Mathis had an effect on more than just one song. He was given the Grammy Lifetime Achievement Award in 2003 in honor of his many years of service. Not only were his songs well-liked, they were also seen as important to history and culture. In 2024, the Library of Congress added chances to the National Recording Registry to show that they understood this. This made sure that future generations would be able to hear what made Mathis famous. While this was going on, Frank Sinatra never held back an opinion, and his first words about Johnny Mathis were not good. He allegedly called Mathis the African Queen and said, "He sings well, but who wants to listen to that shit?" to dismiss his music. Sinatra's style was based on complex wording and sharing stories. Mathis, on the other hand, sang romantic songs with a voice that was like silk. This way of doing things seemed too soft and emotional to Sinatra. But time can change how you see things. People looked up to Mathis as his fame and success grew. Sinatra finally agreed that Mathis had one of the most recognizable voices in the world. He even called Mathis the master song salesman. Johnny Carson went even further and called Mathis the best song singer in the world. Bing Crosby agreed with Carson. The comments weren't just words of praise. They came from some of the biggest names in culture, people who knew what it meant to be successful for a long time. Mathis never replied to what Sinatra said at the beginning. He instead carried himself with style, never saying anything bad about the famous singer. That quiet pride made his status even better. Mathis sold more than 100 million records around the world over the course of 6 decades, becoming the voice of hits like Misty and Chances Are. His work showed that talent and consistency can last through even the worst criticism. Critics were another thing Mathis had to get past. In the 1950s, people who were strict about jazz thought his songs were too sentimental. They called his music elevator music, which was meant to make it sound less artsy. They thought Mathis' smooth, polished sound was too commercial since jazz was all about improvising and being good at your craft. Misty was written by jazz musician Errol Garner, but even Garner didn't like Mathis' version. He believed it was too polished and too pop, but people didn't seem to mind. Mathis' version of Misty was a huge hit, going all the way to number 12 on the Billboard Hot 100. It also earned him his first Grammy nod. The song became so linked to him over time that it's now known as his signature track. Mathis never let the bad comments get to him. He wasn't interested in names or fitting into a certain type of music. He said, "I don't care about labels. My only wish was to sing lovely songs." He was able to build a career that went beyond musical trends because of the way he thought. While reviewers argued about whether or not his style was artistic, audiences loved it. Johnny's Greatest Hits, 1958, was the first album of greatest hit songs, and all of his records went gold or platinum. Mathis not only got through the doubt, he beat it in the end. His songs lived on. He had an impact, and his voice became a part of pop culture history. Even the people who used to say bad things about him had to admit the truth. Johnny Mathis was more than just a star. He was a legend.